Welcome to Indonesian International Islamic University. Established on June 5th, 2018. This campus is expected to be a place for the growth of faith and humanity. We recognize truth and humanity as our motto because we believe that Islamic values and humanity are always connected.
As an inclusive campus, IIIU welcomes anyone regardless of differences in religious background, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, and abilities.
Delivering an international standard education, IIIU is the only university in Indonesia that focuses on postgraduate education, namely master's and doctoral programs, since its establishment. In this campus, students learn their skills and deepen their knowledge in the fields of Islam, social sciences, economics and business, education, law, science and technology, and the arts. IIIU is determined to help talented young people from all over the world, so this campus is made for talented youths to flourish. Thus, hundreds of prestigious young students from 5 continents have been registered as IIIU students and are occupying our dormitories. At IIIU, they study with professors, lecturers, academics, and researchers who have experience teaching in world campuses and graduates from well-known universities in Asia, America, Europe, the Middle East, and Australia. With strong support from the government of Indonesia, IIIU continues to build infrastructure, management, faculty and library buildings, lecturer housing, dormitories, sports facilities, reforestation programs, and much, much more. We believe we can grow bigger than our dreams and hopes. We strive to continue to make improvements through various innovations, collaborations, as well as dialogue with students, lecturers, and staff in carrying out the university's vision and mission. Come to IIIU and join future leaders from various countries to seek knowledge to the ends of the earth.
Everyone has their own story and their own journey. Each person's journey is unique. They have their own set of goals. So, what is the most important part of a journey? Is it the beginning? Is it the people you meet during the journey? At the Faculty of Islamic Studies, every journey matters, and every part of that journey is priceless.
Welcome to the Faculty of Islamic Studies
at the Indonesian International Islamic University.
As part of the newly established international university, aiming to position itself as one of the leading institutes for higher learning in the Muslim world by developing excellent graduate degree programs, innovative research, and vibrant socio-cultural activities, the Faculty of Islamic Studies has established a strong foundation since its inauguration in September 2021 by recruiting the best faculty members, designing innovative curriculum, and organizing numerous academic and research activities.
Our journey began with a single goal in mind: creating a better world by providing excellent education and research on Islam and society in the Muslim world. We take the first step by establishing a world-class Islamic studies faculty, where you can experience an international environment while pursuing classical and contemporary approaches in Islamic studies. A journey is not something you should undertake alone. Along your journey, you will walk alongside others who share the same vision and goals. The Faculty of Islamic Studies is a place where students from various countries, more than 15 countries, can experience the richness and diversity of Indonesian society while living with the universal values of Islam. We care about your journey in education, and so you'll be guided by the best lecturers with numerous accomplishments and awards. They are graduates of the best universities worldwide, of both Western and Middle Eastern countries. In addition, All lecturers at the Faculty of Islamic Studies actively contribute to research and development at various institutions on a national and international scale, and you will be a part of it as well. We understand your strong desire to grow and innovate. We are constantly developing academic programs, such as dual degree programs and research collaboration, in cooperation with campuses in various countries, including the United Kingdom and Egypt. All programs are designed to produce Islamic studies experts who are masters in classical Islamic texts and modern social science. And you will participate directly.
Faculty of Islamic Studies at the Indonesian International Islamic University is the best place for those who wish not only to explore Islamic studies, but also to discover Islamic civilization in Indonesia and the global Muslim world that can make a positive contribution in the discovery of knowledge and the preservation of world civilization. Graduates of the Faculty of Islamic Studies are expected to advance their career in academia, research institutions, policymaking institutions, international consulting agency, diplomatic work, government sectors, and also international organizations.
You want freedom and comfort, and so do we. We provide the best facilities to help you become an active and innovative generation in all aspects of life.
Good morning,
both
ladies and
academic
gentlemen.
and
Your attention,
non-academic.
please. We kindly ask you to take your seats as the event of the third day of the IFAR Consortium Conference 2026 is about to begin. Thank you.
And the sky is the limit. We will grow continuously along the journey, helping you develop all of your intelligence, physically, mentally, and spiritually. By doing so, we will produce critical human beings, capable of making a positive impact on social, political, and cultural aspects of life in Muslim societies.
Yes, it's you.
An exciting journey, isn't it? Your journey to an international education will start in Depok City, a city with numerous natural resources, with huge potential and opportunity waiting to be explored. Whether you want to see classic or latte art, Depok has everything you need to support you in your education journey. Get ready. It is time to make your own story. At the Faculty of Islamic Studies at IIIU, we are ready to accompany you along this incredible journey.
The world today is more connected than ever. Understanding it requires global perspectives, critical thinking, and meaningful international engagement.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third day of the IFAR Consortium Conference of 2026. Here we are at our final day, and over the past 2 days, we've listened, discussed, and talked to each other and connected and shared new ideas on the contours of inequality, power, protest, and privilege in Southeast Asia. Today's program will bring us to a meaningful close with the final plenary session and a closing statement from the Vice Rector of Academics of UIII. Without further ado, we shall start with the plenary session 3, Politics of Inequality in Southeast Asia. And I humbly invite the chair and panelists to the stage, starting with Dr. Rima Prama Arta as the moderator from the Faculty of Economics and Business. Rizky Nauli Siregar, Department of Economics, Universitas Indonesia. Lee Hock Aun from ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, Singapore. And Dr. William Hurst, Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies, University of Cambridge. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. To Dr. Rima Arta, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rima Arta. I'm from Faculty of Economics and Business in here, IIIU. And it is a great pleasure for me to chair for the last session. And it is also a pleasure to have 3 very extraordinary speakers. I think before we start, I will just explain what will happen in this session and read a brief bio of our speaker. The first speaker is Rizky Nauli Siregar. She is a lecturer in Faculty of Economic and Business, University of Indonesia, and her focus research is international trade and development economics. And she holds PhD from UC Davis and graduated in 2021. And our second speaker is Lee Hock Aun. He is from ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute, and he is a senior fellow and co-coordinator of Malaysian study in that institute. And then he is an author of Affirmative Action in Malaysia and South Africa Preference of Parity. And our last speaker is Dr. William Hurst. He is a Chonghua Professor of Chinese Development at Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Study from University of Cambridge and also co-director of Center for Geopolitics. So I guess before we start, each of the panelists will be present for about 20 minutes, and we will remind the last 5 minutes and 1 minute. And then after that, we will have Q&A session. Please, for the participant who want to ask a question, please state your name and your affiliation. So I guess without further ado, I will give a time for Rizky Nauli Siregar to speak about East Indonesian growing inclusivity, a look at a past and present reality. So Kiki, time is yours. Yes.
Wah, tinggi sekali nih, I'm very small. Okay, good morning everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very grateful to be here, and I know some of you might think like, why is an economist in a political session, political science session? This is entirely due to unforeseeable schedule that I had, but hopefully what I'm going to present, going to give you some perspective on what's maybe, behind the stream of, unhappiness or critics of, or people who are not really feeling the growth that the country is having in place. So this is a very kind of like a brief work on and a narrative. I'm going to give you some narrative on what kind of growth that we have been going further and looking not really past, but like just the past 15 years. Okay, so this is a joint work with 2 of my juniors, Kashmal and Alaika. Next. So there are 2 big, next, Ini ke siapa ya? Atau ke sini? Oke, sorry. Okay, so there are two big phenomenon in aggregate that we see in the past 5 years. So here, let's compare the typical growth. Yeah, we have GDP growth, and another one we have real wage growth. The blue bars are GDP growth. Meanwhile, the green bars is real GDP growth. So what we see is that before pandemic, real GDP growth kind of match closely with with GDP growth. Yeah, so it means that if the economy is growing 5%, purchasing power also grows around 5%, like 4 to 5%. During pandemic, not a surprise, real wage dropped a lot. Yeah, and we see that even the real wage contracted by 5%. But after pandemic, what we see is that even though we have a moderate economic growth of around 5%, we do not feel that real wage or purchasing power also grow as strong as the economic growth. So this has been questions that people have been kind of asking, and given I don't know whether you follow the current debate about the economic growth. Of course, there is like debate how dependable the data now, but let's just put it as it is. We have modest growth, but it's not translated to real wage growth. The second big phenomenon that I think many of you have known is that we have a shrinking middle class. There are many, version of this growth incidence curve. Yeah. Maybe you have seen it in different calculation. This is I'm just going to compare between 2012 to 2018 and then 2018 to 2024. And what we going to the right is household percentile. So the top earners is the one on the right, and then the bottom one is on the left. What we see is that before pandemic, we can see that the middle class have enjoying a higher growth of purchasing power, but after pandemic, the increase in expenditure per capita in this case, or purchasing power, is lower for the middle class. So this is kind of like what we see in the news, and many have shown that we have a shrinking middle class. Oh, kemana ini? Okay, so what I'm going to do in this paper is that just the big motivation is that, okay, if we are growing, and we see that we are growing in the headline, who feels this, right? So are we growing inclusively? What I'm going to do to answer this question is that let's see two dimensions that I think important in terms of the welfare that people feel. So sometimes if we think about how good your livelihood is, then it really matters in which sector you work in and then where you live. Right, so that's why I'm going to look up like sectoral inequality and regional inequality over time. What I'm going to do is that I'm just going to present the facts. Yeah, I'm not going to put like a causal relationship on what drives this inequality, but I hope this is going to provide some motivation on more questions on how we see this kind of change in the past 10 years. Yeah, and I think this is quite different with like the whole Asian financial crisis path, and there's quite a distinct change in the past 5 to 10 years. And for an econometric exercise to just see whether, okay, if we have some inequality, and this has been there all the time, are we seeing any convergence? And I'm going to do like a simple beta convergence exercise as in Kramer et al. 2022. So what we know so far about inequality is that we see some convergence, convergence holds on average, but disparity persists, especially between West and East, many papers have shown this. We also see there is some neighborhood effects, so if you are in the neighbors of growing regions, then you may also feel that you are growing due to this spillover. There are some papers showing that this convergence or the catch-up is driven really by education and health, so human capital investment is very important. But then we do see some signs of decrease or weakening convergence. And also we do see some this convergence more at the provincial level than at district level. What I'm going to do here, most of my exercise will be at provincial level and not at district level due to data availability. So let's see what happened across sector. And I think this is important because everyone is always talking about structural transformation, right? So in structural transformation, it's not really only about you move from agriculture to manufacturing and then to services, but let's think about, whether people can move from lower productivity sector to a higher productivity sector. So this doesn't have to be manufacturing or any services, but anything that has a higher and equal productivity. So here I plot just simple the growth rate of, this is 10-year growth rate, and average on the horizontal axis of the sectoral output. So if the sector grows a lot, then you will be on the right side. And on the vertical axis, we have employment growth. So the idea is that if you are working at a sector that grows a lot, do these sectors also employ more? And we do see some positive associations. So the sectors that have high growth also employ more. However, I think that the big challenge here is that, so the size of the circles is the size of the sector in 2025. So what we can see is that the one with the big bubbles are all in the bottom left, meaning that the one that actually employ more do not grow much and also do not employ more, right? So that's kind of like the big burden of these sectors that have not been able to create better jobs. So, for example, A is agriculture, forestry and fishing, C is manufacturing, point G is wholesale and trade. These are all the ones that really have big sectoral output, but they do not grow that much, like lower than 4% over the past 10 years, and also do not employ a lot more. Yeah, so I think this kind of give you some idea about like, okay, the sectors that we hope to employ more do not employ more. And for example, okay, high growth is J for information and communication, 8% growth, really amazing growth, and also high increase in employment growth, but they're small, right? So they are not as big as, yet to be able to create good jobs. Next, let's see then, okay, do we see any association between output growth and wage growth? So the questions about the first slide is that, okay, we see modest growth, but it's not translated into real wage growth, right? So are we moving to more capital intensive sectors, for example? So yes, it seems that there's relatively zero association between sectoral growth and wage growth. So if your sectors grow a lot, it's not directly translated into the increase of the wages of the people working in that sectors. So I think that's also an interesting news now that, if you, for example, even at, point J, like bubble J, which is information and communication, 8% growth, but wage growth is not as high as the sectoral growth. So this kind of also provides some idea that perhaps more and more all of these sectors becomes, have less share of labor. Let's see whether the one that grow a lot employ more college graduate. And this is not surprise, but quite surprising for me, because okay, there are not as much high-skilled workers in Indonesia, but I hope that those sectors that should be employing more have a high share of college graduate. Interestingly, not so much. Yeah, so relatively no correlation between output growth and the share of college graduates. Okay. So that's what we see in the sectoral side. And let's see now about regional inequality. And I think this is quite important because after the decentralizations, we kind of hope that many of these regions will be able to catch up more independently, yeah, with bigger transfer to the regions and so on. So let's just do some plain vanilla, see the changes in distribution in two measures. The left-hand side is GDP per capita, regional, this is provincial level. On the right-hand side is expenditure per capita. Why I put expenditure per capita? Because I think in Indonesia this is very important to compare the two, because we have many provinces with high extractive sectors. So even though you may have high GDP per capita, it may not be translated into high expenditure per capita. So I know I should have put only 3 years, but let's just focus on the blue line, which is the initial condition, 2010. And I think just pre-pandemic, this is the orange line, 2019. And then the black line, this is 2025, yeah? So what we can see that in both measures, the distribution shift to the right. So on average, people are getting richer, both in terms of GDP per capita and also expenditure per capita. However, what I think interesting is that the spread of this distribution doesn't change and even actually gets wider. So it means that, okay, we may see that many regions catch up, but there are regions that just stay there, right? Like on the left hand, this is quite apparent, for example, in the expenditure per capita, the black lines, the spread is even actually wider than the other years, yeah? So we know that we do see some catch up, and we would like to do some calculation on how fast is this catch up and whether there is this catch up. So what I did is that I just calculate the convergence speed over time, and this is a simple convergence calculation. So I follow the strategy in Kramer et al. 2022 to study convergence over time, and instead of like they use for cross-country variation convergence, I do for regional inequality here in Indonesia. Formally, we call this beta convergence as the equation number 1. So what is important here is that on the right-hand side, we have growth, yeah, GDP growth. And in this case, I will use GDP growth and also expenditure per capita growth. And this is regress on the initial GDP per capita on levels. So the idea is that if the beta here is negative, then we see catch up. Yeah, regions are converging to one another. So we would like to have it a negative beta. If the beta is positive, then what we see is divergence. Yeah. So to compare periods, I estimate in 4 to 5 year span. Yeah, one of the period is 4 years, just because I would like to skip a pandemic. So let's compare beta T here for different periods. So this is the results. So I split the panel into all provinces, and if I exclude Jakarta and resource-heavy provinces, yeah. So what's interesting is that the convergence is totally the opposite between PDRB, which is GDP per capita, good, and also with expenditure per capita. Let's go first. My preference is the one that is excluding Jakarta and resource-heavy. But I think even with the one all province, the expenditure per capita tells you a lot, yeah? So what we see in terms of GDP per capita is that in earlier years, 2010, 2015, we do see some convergence. But this convergence in terms of expenditure per capita is basically zero. This is quite surprising for me even because I thought during the time of commodity boom, we would see expenditure per capita catch up. But it seems at that time, it's not that strong to the point that those that are lagging is the one that is catching up. Yeah, so everyone is just growing together. Yeah. However, if we see the more recent years, yeah, 2021, 2020, 25, is that in terms of GDP per capita, we do not see any catch up. Basically, that's zero for if we include all provinces, and actually convergence happened in expenditure per capita. So this idea of shrinking middle class can be, we thought that the inequality will increase, but maybe I cannot we need to study this further, and I hope some of you will study this. So who is actually doing the convergence? Is it that, you know, the richer actually getting less rich region, yeah, or the poor region catching up? Yeah, so because we see expenditure per capita catch up in recent years. But politically, I think this is also interesting. Maybe what we see in terms of political outcomes in the past election is actually this. We thought in Jakarta people are not happy with inequality, but maybe in other parts of the country, people are actually doing fine and they're actually catching up, right? So this kind of like, I thought this was sobering for me when I see these results. This is just the result in bars, but the same idea is this. And I think if I have like another 3 minutes, in the past 3 minutes, I would like to see like, okay, what changes in terms of quality? So the first one, I plot GDP per capita with expenditure per capita, especially for the past 5 years, sorry. The left-hand side is when I include every provinces. The right-hand side, if I only include the one, or when I exclude Jakarta and resource heavy. So what we can see is that the red dots are the one that is being excluded on the the right side. And as you can see is that these red dots have extraordinarily high growth, which is, for example, Papua has more than 12%. Sulawesi Tengah has around 10% growth. Kalimantan Timur have really high growth in expenditure per capita. So that's why they are really, really outliers, except for Riau. So if we see closely the one that is not red and not blue, which is the gray lines, they're just clustered on the left side, right? So, and as we can see, the convergence, the relationship between GDP per capita and expenditure per capita is not that good. So this is why I think if we want to understand livelihood, it's important to not really focus on GDP per capita per province. Because this kind of like really not match up with what people are, you know, spending or how good their purchasing power are. Okay. So I just go over the distribution. I know I should have, another extension should be, we need to see the convergence of human capital investment, convergence of market dynamism. But this is what I do here is just, let's see just plain vanilla distribution of all of these determinants of convergence. So for schooling, we do see that everyone is moving to the right, meaning that mean average of schooling is actually getting better. But we do see the spread is even wider. In terms of access to market, the red line is going down, so meaning that more regions are actually getting better access to market. So this is share of villages without shops or markets, yeah. So this is a good sign that the distribution actually go to the left actually. And then here I think is kind of give some, yeah, good, idea of what's happening in terms of why people are not feeling the growth, yeah. So formal jobs employment have not changed much, I think, right? And it's, the median stays around 40% in all regions. The distribution do not move to the right, yeah. So even through commodity boom, through even through pandemic, I thought it will get worse a lot, but we do see a shift to the right for the yellow lines, but not so much, right? Not so much change after that. And here is what we think also see the other side of the story is that at the pandemic, we see that people are more percentage of people are self-employed. So we see the yellow line this is the pandemic years, yeah? And it has gone better, right? They go to the left. The black distribution is now back to the middle. But it means that not so much improvement, right? And also, another type of informality is that if you work for family, and as you can see here, the range becomes even higher. So maybe they're not, we thought that, oh, informality actually gets better. So the scarring effect has gone better, right? Like has been catered, but in terms of self-employment, but not so much in family employment. So maybe instead of working for yourself, then you work for your family. So this kind of gave a sign of business dynamism that has been getting better. So in conclusion, and I think this is more about, more questions for everyone, for even for more studies, is that regional GDP may not provide the real livelihood measure. And I think we do see some signs of slowing business dynamism. And the questions about sectoral inequalities that we do see less growth in labor-intensive goods sectors, and also the one that we hope to have got good job creations. So I'll stop there and happy to discuss further. Thank you so much.
A very insightful talk about some indication where some indicators so better than from the pandemic, but not necessarily better from the past. Yeah. I guess now the time for the second speaker. Please, Lee. Time is yours.
Selamat sejahtera. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Pak Siro, especially IFAR and UI3 for a kind invitation to this conference and the opportunity to present some of my thoughts at this plenary session. And as well, thanks to all the students for very kind hospitality. It's been a really good conference with very insightful and stimulating presentations, and I think very fruitful conversations. When I was asked to present at this plenary, I thought, what am I going to say? There was a research paper I presented at a panel, and I also thought maybe as a plenary, it might be useful to present something that's more of a big picture, a reflective piece, and something that could spur more discussion. And so with that interest and that objective, and also I thought a good opportunity to revisit something that has been on my mind. Ever since a project of about 8 years ago, Zulfan was involved in that. We had 8 countries, so I coordinated it, various contributions from around Southeast Asia. And one thing that emerged was on inequality, was that there's actually quite widely in most countries a trend of downward inequality, so reducing inequality. And yet, of course, it is an issue that weighs on society, something that is regarded as a major problem. And so that was something that strikes me as a paradox. And now is an opportunity just to update that as well with new data and just to consider that issue in the contemporary context in Southeast Asia. So, falling inequality, rising insecurity, Southeast Asian reflections on a paradox. My name is Hock An. Lee is the family name. Sometimes I use Hock An Lee in a more international context, and Lee Hock An if it seems to be more Singapore and Malaysia, but sometimes I lose track. But trust me, I am a reasonably cohesive person, and you won't find that name elsewhere as well, so I don't think there will be much mistaken identity. So as an overview, just to give a sense of where we're heading, I will spend the first part under the theme of capturing this paradox about the empirical record, where there is either stable or declining inequality in much of Southeast Asia, but the perception of inequality, right, that it is high, that it is increasing, that it is a high-order national problem, and of course, a source of political disaffection. Paradox, of course, doesn't mean that they cannot coexist and they are contradiction, right? That would be obvious, but to me, I think, yes, this does pose a bit of a paradox. And then I would unpack that to offer three perspectives. First, in terms of economic uncertainty and persisting difficulties with cost of living, especially, the diminishing upward mobility and compounded disadvantage, and I think that is addressing the theme of privilege, the sort of the counterpoint to that. And then wealth power concentration, disempowerment of the masses, and conclude with brief takeaways. So, so the reference point, yes, is the Gini coefficient. It is the one that is available. It's widely reported as well. But here we look at the ones that have some snapshots over time, so we can compare them intertemporally, which is not bad for Southeast Asia. There's 7 of the countries here. And as we noted in the first session, right, household expenditure, some are based on household expenditure, and some are household income. Household income tends to be higher as well. But the more important thing here is the trend. And so we can see here with Indonesia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, where they report expenditure. So yes, except for Laos with that upward trend, we see actually in general it's stable with Vietnam, and we're looking more at the last 15 years. It's a declining trend in Thailand and in Indonesia. For Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore that report on basis of household income, Malaysia is sort of tiered step by step, but overall a downward trend. Same for Philippines and Singapore, again, especially, let's say, the last 15 to 20 years. So this is something that features in Southeast Asia. I mean, it's not unique globally as well. And of course, some are moving up, some are more flat and downward. But I think some of the salient ones that we could refer to here, there's Brazil, Mexico. The levels are higher. That's sort of a Latin America phenomenon. But these are the ones that have also shown a downward trend. We see with the behemoths, China, India, especially with China also showing a downward trend. For US and France, just to highlight them here because they are sort of the epicenters of a lot of the recent research, the influential works on wealth inequality, Piketty and Paris, and I think also quite a lot in the US. So for the US, it's not really been a clear trend, but the important point is that it remains high, above 0.4, and France is sort of hovering, not really a clear trend, but certainly not moving down. And then, interestingly, the Nordic countries, 2 of them that have shown among the OECD a more clear trend is upward for Sweden and Denmark. Right. So there is this, stable or in many countries downward trend based on household income or expenditure surveys. Is this relevant? I would say yes. Right? This is nationally representative data. I think it's still informative and it's useful for our consideration. Is it credible? Well, there are data limitations arising from the survey itself, from undersampling of the rich. I mean, I do want to add a point that although yes, the concern is that the super rich and the billionaires, they're not there, but actually you don't really necessarily want to have billionaires when you're doing a population sample because each observation is supposed to then be multiplied by whatever it may be, the weightage of 1,000. So if you actually get a billionaire, the very unusual billionaire that will respond to being sampled, then it will also be a misrepresentation. But aside from that, the super rich, maybe still there could be a lower response rate, difficulty in sampling the rich. It could be underreporting as well of income and informal economy, and of course other limitations. So I think we recognize that, but we have to use and to use these data with care. But also, again, if our interest being mainly in the trend, if those limitations are more consistent across time, then they wouldn't really affect the veracity of the trend data. Right? So if it's undercounted at one point it would be consistently undercounted. And I don't think I have a basis to say that the level of underrepresentation or the deficiencies have changed very much over time. So I think the trend would still hold regardless of, while we're accepting the caveat of the limitations. I'm having a hard time reading there, so I just have to turn this way. And also the other thing about, I think, lends a bit of credibility to this downward trends in many Southeast Asian countries is that they do concur with a lot of the policies, whether it's with structural changes, the growth by sector or occupation. Certainly, mainly speaking from the experience of doing work on Malaysia and policy developments with Southeast Asia in the last 15 years, introducing or increasing minimum wage and social assistance and grants and all that. So, I think these do lend credibility to the downward inequality trends. But is it sufficient? Well, obviously, no. I just want to, make that clear, my position on that. Yeah, it's not the only thing, and there are certainly supplementary angles, including wealth inequality measures. Another thing about Southeast Asia, I think this is really building on Rizky and team's presentation that was focused on Indonesia, right? That, growth has been, fairly robust when you pan out and compare with other regions in the world. So you have the ASEAN 5, just drawing them out here because some of the data presented later are referring to them. Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Singapore, the countries that have been sampled. But then you get a sense here that yes, the growth is relatively higher, certainly than Latin America, except for South Asia, China. And so that does have an implication that, well, wouldn't, that combined with reduced inequality, be generating more broad-based benefits because there's been growth. I mean, I leave that as a question. I'm not making a strong assertion about that, but certainly the context is important for consideration of Southeast Asia is the growth that has been experienced. So the paradox, inequality, has it been resolved? Obviously, I'm not saying it has been, but we take into account that there have been this record of declining Gini coefficients. Is it still a problem? Well, let's not just think about our anecdotal evidence, but and our thoughts on that, but some of these surveys. So I do refer to two here, one by the Pew Research Center on the left here, and they have addressed this question. I mean, it's just a zeitgeist issue that, many survey institutions are doing, and their clients are also interested in it. It's something of public interest as well. So they have asked this question for the Pew. I did look up the methodology and the sampling. They have about 1,000 per country. And I think they were striving for national representative, stratified random sampling. The left side, Ipsos one, was a smaller sample of 500 and acknowledged that it's more urban and higher educated. So they acknowledged that there would be certain bias there. But just to see here, how the populations would regard the severity of the problem of inequality, right? Overwhelmingly, yes, it's regarded as a very big problem or a moderately big problem. With reference to, as well, the mean of the overall 35 countries for the Pew and 31 countries in the Ipsos survey. It is the single or most important, there is actually quite resonant agreement with that side of that spectrum of opinion. I think this concurs as well, I think, with, if we are following, right, the issue, the public discourse, in the media and various spaces that we can be tracking. One of the interesting findings from the Ipsos survey was that for Indonesia and Thailand, the inequality, the sort of severity of that as a problem, so how important it is as a national problem, was higher than the predicted value based on this regression here. So that line is showing the fit, and it's actually quite a reasonable fit. As you would expect, countries that have higher inequality, right, they would consider that as a greater problem. But for Indonesia and Thailand, it is actually much greater than would be expected based on this two-way relationship. So just a point of interest, and I think these are two countries, of course Indonesia, what I know is it's really just to follow the discussions happening here and my Thai and Indonesia studies colleagues, but certainly, you know, the oligarchy issue, the dynastic politics and all that, you know, yeah, we would concur with how with this finding in the opinion survey. So now moving on to some effort to unpack the paradox with these three perspectives. I think economic uncertainty and the persisting cost of living burdens are part of the story of why this documented stable or declining inequality and yet sort of widespread sense of inequality as a very, very pressing problem, where there is less secure employment, less opportunity, the gig work conditions, underemployment, skill job mismatch, the COVID disruptions, slow wage growth, concerns about automation and AI. So the overarching theme of uncertainty and insecurity, I think this can fuel a sense of unfairness and those perceptions of high inequality. Now, I think declining inequality doesn't necessarily mean population has to be satisfied, right? It is a reflection of an overall picture of distribution. I mean, and I think that's especially true if people are struggling with cost of living. And we do focus on the low income segments, rightfully, where there may be struggles more with the basic needs, right? And targeted programs can boost the income, which then shows up as increased household income and reducing, you know, the Gini coefficient. But the need for those kind of interventions would be also reflecting, right, that their own private self-generated income is inadequate. Another aspect is also at the middle, and this is, I'm in the back of my mind, is more the Malaysia experience, I think, where there have been a lot of interventions more at the lower end. A lot more expression of the discontent is arising from lower middle and the middle portions of the wage and occupational distribution. And it could pertain to other things like quality of jobs, employment, cost of housing. So not just the basic needs and things like medical, insurance, and then jobless graduates. The second aspect is the diminishing upward mobility, compounded disadvantage. So this can be an experience, 5, sure, or something that is seen as a future prospect. Upward mobility, right, gives that relief, right? It's associated with lower inequality, the relief that you can actually escape and move upward from one generation to the next. I think it gives us a greater sense of economic security. Referencing those surveys again, to the statement, children will be worse off than their parents. Actually, not so bad in Southeast Asia, the sense of pessimism. It was much worse for the more advanced economies, you know. But you know, they're just anyway something for our reference. The second one was showing that for more in a global sense, generationally, the views towards these sort of statements. So chances of success depends more on factors beyond one's control, right? So that would be taking your assessment of whether or not circumstances are going to confine you and limit upward mobility. And there's, you know, a clear trend that the younger you are, the more you would feel that factors beyond your control exert an influence. And then the sort of the converse to that, chances of success mostly on merit and effort, right? The more senior respondents to these surveys feel that yes, you can by merit and effort. The younger Gen Z are feeling that no, it's despite efforts, right? We're stuck in your situation. Educational mobility. I just briefly reference this. It's I think a very major one, and I think the author made a visit to UI. I saw her face in the promotional video. That education, I mean, it is, you know, a primary pathway, but the overall conclusion there was that social mobility was flat and even declining in some countries. So graduates from advantaged families still would, of course, have much better prospects than graduates of disadvantaged families. On mobility, there is a particular reference to Malaysia that I just want to mention briefly here, that was looking at the quintiles and how households in the bottom quintiles predominantly remain there, and those in the top as well predominantly remain there, whereas in the middle there's a little bit more fluidity. And one other finding to show that the reinforcement, right, of diminished mobility is that workers, the premium for holding higher education was less in lower income households compared to higher income households. So I think I'll just move on to the third about wealth and power. I think this is probably the clearest and most consequential aspect of this paradox. Wealth concentration is a direct manifestation of inequality. The wealth-power nexus, you know, is of vested interest in engineering conditions favorable. And I think a lot of the sense of disaffection with the system, you know, is targeted at this. There are many ways to look at the measurement, which I think is important, but as well, there's such a variety. This one I can refer to here, looked at the billionaire wealth. So it's not a fixed number of people and how it has increased in these countries. And high net worth individuals, the growth is expected to as well be high growth over the next few years. Of course, those numbers are not really going to matter to people. I think what matters is that what's the implication of that? Does that have an effect on the system and on people's prospects, on their chances, on the overall fairness? And it is really striking from going back to the Pew survey that the biggest contributor to inequality among the respondents was the rich have too much political influence, greater than the other answers here that they were asked to respond to. So it is part of, I think, the ground source of protests, youth-led protests that we have seen recently. They also tend to be triggered by corruption. You know, in the Philippines, it was something else. In Indonesia, another thing. I think we are mindful of this, but I just wanted to, just to put this discussion in that context. So takeaways, I think the aggregate indicators, they're still valuable. There are downward trends. Progressive policies should continue. Wealth inequality research should be pursued further. On insecurity and cost of living, I think this reinforces the importance of the fundamentals, wage growth, of social protection, and focusing also on the middle, not just on the lowest income. And diminishing mobility, well, it's, I mean, a bit obvious, and very general, but I think needs to be said, to reduce the barriers, maintain education pathways for wealth power concentration. I think it is very much political solutions, so things like regulating political funding, combating corruption, and wealth tax, which is, I think, has to be a much bigger and deeper discussion, but I think needs to be part of this conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
outcomes of that transition structure current inequality and political contestation. I should say this is part of a larger work that I've been at for about 15 years, comparing mainland China, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Malaysia in terms of land politics. And so the basics of the framework can be summed up in a 2x2 table. A lot of talk about 2x2s yesterday. I'll give you another one. So when we think about land reform or changes to the land system, one axis that is very important is redistribution. Now by redistribution, usually what's meant is land to the tiller in some form, right? That phrase came up yesterday. It comes up a lot in the discourse around land politics. But it doesn't have to be land being redistributed from some group of people that own it back to those who actually use it. It could be the other way around. Think of the enclosure movement in England. Right? It could be very much so that those already at the top of the hierarchy get more and more land redistributed to them. Why is redistribution important? Redistribution, whether it goes upwards or downwards, I argue is important for the following reason. In a traditional agrarian society, the vast majority of the population is engaged in agricultural labor. Meanwhile, the vast bulk of resources and capital are applied to the agricultural enterprise. The fruits of agricultural cultivation then are split between those who actually do the work in order to subsist, those who control the land and the state. Right? So we have sort of the peasants, the lords, and the overlords to whom those lords are vassals. Right? And most of that is going to subsistence in the case of the low-level people in the system, or to higher level consumption at the level of sort of those who own the land, or to the state functions. And it's all being used up. Now, if you have redistribution downwards, what does that do? It means that more of the produce of agricultural labor can be retained by the farmers themselves, right? The people working on the land. They're already able to subsist in the old system. So if they get more of that, they can spend it. Right? They will spend it on something other than just base level subsistence. They could pay it in taxes, right? They could spend it on other consumption. If you give it to the people higher up in the system, right? Give the landowners more land. There's only so many stately homes one lord can live in. There's only so much good food and wine he or she can consume, right? They're already consuming at that level. So if you give them more, they will invest. Again, think of the enclosures. Why do they start dabbling in textile mills? Because they can. They've got some extra money sitting around. They'll try it, right? Redistribution, whether upwards or downwards, in other words, unlocks the surplus from the agrarian sector for application to other areas of the economy, right? Could be industrialization, could be other kinds of consumption, could be trade and other forms, but redistribution moves capital out of agriculture and into something else. The second axis of the 2x2 is what I would call commodification. And I want to be very clear that by commodification, what I'm talking about is not commodity agricultural production necessarily. This is not a plantation. Right? Plantations are not really commodity or commodified this way at all, for the most part. It's not the transition to cash crops. It is rather, in the Polanyian sense, the transition of land from being something intrinsic and inalienable to something that can be bought, sold, traded, or borrowed against, like a commodity, a fictitious commodity even, if you will. That we pretend that we can make and destroy and buy and sell land in this way, and because we pretend together, it works. Now, what's the effect of commodification if and when it happens? Most people, in the World Bank, for example, and some of the literature more recently on land reform, love to point to land titling, cadastral surveys, and commodification as a way to unlock capital. My argument is that is not the primary outcome from commodification. The primary outcome, rather, is that commodification, the primary outcome, rather, is that commodification actually pushes labor out of the agrarian sector faster than would have happened more naturally on its own. And the way that happens is thus. When someone receives title to the land, what can you do with it? You can buy it. Or sorry, you can sell it. If you sell it, where are you going? You're leaving. You're off the land. You're going to the city. You're going to the factory. You're going to open a shop in the village. You're no longer engaged in agriculture. If you buy land from others, you're not going to add more labor to that land, most likely. And if you are, you're adding it because you're taking it away from some other part of the land you already own. Right? Well, one person cannot work on more and more and more land and have more labor applied to the land. If you borrow against it, what will you do? Right? If I use that land as collateral and I take a loan, usually I'm going to use that loan for one of two things. Either to go into some non-agricultural business, a finished shop, a restaurant, something like this, or I'm going to invest in labor-saving technology. And if I do the latter, whether that be mechanization or fertilizer or anything else, what that will do is it means that not all of my kids need to work on that plot of land anymore. Right? I've saved the need for that labor. So commodification will quicken and intensify the movement of labor out of the agrarian sector. Right? So now we can have the four cells of the 2x2. Right? If we imagine a reality in which there's both commodification and redistribution from this agrarian society towards something else, what then occurs is a surplus from the agrarian sector is freed up for investment or development of some other kind, and labor is pushed off the land quickly, creating a kind of reserve army of industrial workers. It's a very good foundation for building some kind of industrial developmental state, we would call it. If we have a situation in which there is redistribution but no commodification, what this does is it unlocks all of that store of capital and resources, but it does not push people off the land. In fact, in many situations, those people may have to be tied even more strongly to the land. Right? In this scenario, it's very difficult, actually, to manage the situation politically sometimes, because what you've done is you've taken all of the resources out of the land, but you've left the people there. And someone that has to manage the allocation of those resources. I'll argue it's the state in those cases. If you have a scenario in which you have commodification, but not redistribution, in that situation, what we see is that the resources are not there, they're not freed up, because there's been no meaningful redistribution. Yet, people are being pushed off of the land faster than might otherwise have occurred. And we see, therefore, a large number of now landless peasants moving to cities, looking for work, trying to get out of the agrarian sector without necessarily the economic growth or development to support that. It also can lead to land contestation as a primary axis of political conflict. Right? That conflict over who exactly owns this land, because ownership of the land is very important when it's been commodified but not redistributed, can be the main axis of political contestation. And then finally, we have the kind of negative case cell in which neither redistribution nor commodification has happened in any meaningful way. What happens there? There we see mostly people remaining on the land, and we also don't see a great deal of that surplus freed up for any kind of investment. Basically, with regard to my cases that I look at, mainland China is a case of redistribution without commodification. Right? The state becomes what I call the landlord of last resort in the 1950s, and it's still there. Chinese governments at all levels derive roughly 75 to 80% of their revenue to this day from land rents. And this pattern sort of locks China into a particular kind of extractive authoritarianism with regard to land. Taiwan is a case where both commodification and redistribution happen. Yesterday we heard, 2 days ago, we heard this wonderful keynote speech about the developmental state. What is the roots of this supposedly fabulous developmental state in Taiwan? This land reform. And that's recognized even by the Taiwanese authorities themselves. What it did, though, also is it created winners and losers. And in fact, with democratization, those who lost from land reform are now back as first the political opposition, now the party in power. And that is actually the primary cleavage in Taiwanese party politics to this day. I'd be happy to talk more about China and Taiwan in the question and answer if people want to know. But I'd like to focus a little bit more on them now is the other two cases. Indonesia is very much a case where commodification has happened, albeit in a somewhat messy and meandering way, but commodification of land has happened without meaningful redistribution ever having happened. Right? There is an attempt at redistribution, it's rapidly reversed, and then there are very strong attempts at commodification quickly and then more slowly later. This has created a scenario in which the capital available to the Indonesian state or others looking to invest in industrialization is quite limited. Yet, hundreds of millions of farmers over several generations have been pushed off of the land faster than might otherwise have happened without easy opportunities for them waiting in the city or elsewhere in non-agrarian sectors. There are other aspects of the land law that also make particular kinds of land conflict easier to pursue than other things. In Malaysia, we have the negative case. Right? Malaysia has never had, since World War II, really meaningful commodification or redistribution. There never has been. Right? So most land in Malaysia is not alienably titled. Most land in Malaysia has always remained under this kind of semi-aristocratic land tenure system that existed before, with two important exceptions. The new villages, Kampung Baru or Sinsun, right, in the 1950s and early 60s, and Felda from the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I can talk a lot more about that in a minute if there's time. How much time do I have? 3 minutes. Okay, didn't see the sign. So with only 3 minutes left, all I can really do is talk a tiny bit, I think, about Indonesia. And what I'll say about Indonesia then is this. In Indonesia in 1960, after the seizure of dictatorial power by Sukarno a year earlier and the rise of guided democracy, the new parliament that was installed passed this landmark piece of legislation, the Agrarian Law. And the Agrarian Law of 1960 was part and parcel of a land reform program that was meant to be conducted in two phases. First, redistribution in mostly Java and Bali and Madura, and then transmigration of moving people out of the more densely populated islands to less densely populated areas of the archipelago. Transmigration remained in place in different forms for a long time afterwards. Redistribution was undertaken in 1962, 63, and 64, but it was not fully implemented. There's all kinds of local variation and local problems with implementation at that time that I document in the research. But then there's also a strong backlash against it from the landholders who were being dispossessed in order to have land to redistribute to the landless. After 1965, in the coup, one of the first things that Suharto tries to do, and that actually gets done through all of the courts at local levels, is a reversal of almost all of that redistribution. People actually go in and file lawsuits to get their land back. Or, worse, they simply kill the people who had taken the land or who are now on it and seize the land back from them. That happens all over the place, particularly in East Java, Central Java, and Bali. So what then is the most important next step in Indonesia happens from 1971 to 74. this campaign of cadastral surveys, the pendaftaran tanah, right, that happened at that time, a concerted, strong attempt by the infamous Berkeley Mafia to push commodification, to create commodity title throughout all of Indonesia. It doesn't go all the way. It doesn't succeed fully. There have been several attempts since, most notably during the first term of Joko Widodo, to advance further this agenda of commodification. And so what this has meant is that, as I said earlier in the more theoretical section, I know I've only got maybe a minute or two left, is that land contestation is the primary cleavage of Indonesian politics and political economy. And how does one resolve land contestation? This has varied into two broad patterns. Right? So during New Order, you resolve land contestation by access to political reports of power. You basically use force or connections to make sure that the land contestation is resolved in your favor. Now, or to protect assets of land that are trying to be taken from you by someone else. Now, after Reformasi, economic capital. Right? Economic capital is necessary to resolve land contestation in one's favor. What all of this also means, though, is that still we do not see in Indonesia the release of the surplus from agrarian or land-based sectors for other uses to nearly the degree that could have been the case with redistribution, or that still could be were there to be redistribution. And I think actually building on the earlier presentation about extractive provinces, right? We see this in Sulawesi, not just Sulawesi Tengah, but also Sulawesi Tenggara, Sulawesi Selatan, Maluku Utara, several of these places that have now enjoyed this great boom of resources, right? Those resources are not necessarily flowing to the best purpose for investment in infrastructure or industrialization or indeed consumption by the local residents. Redistribution might solve some of that problem, but redistribution is of course also politically messy. The point finally in this is that, and I haven't had a chance to talk about Malaysia and about China or Taiwan, but the point finally in this is that each of these cells comes with very particular long-term baggage in terms of both the immediate outcome, but also the trajectory of political, economic, and social change development in institutions, to which I think we must pay great attention. Failure to do that means failure to understand the basic causal mechanisms that underpin not just inequality, but many critical aspects of the institutional arrangements and political contestation that we see across these four cases in East and Southeast Asia, but also, I would argue, in most of the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor William, that bringing the issues important of land in terms of distribution and commodification to explain the inequality in Southeast Asia. So I guess we received 3 questions, so I will read the question and for the panelists. The first question is from Isan.
about this phenomenon about like the child-free marriage. Like many people decided not to have a children as of the inequality and also the economic uncertainty. And I would like to add one more question as the chair have a power. So I want to ask Professor William about the land and this redistribution and commodification in terms of the context in current issue in South Asia that maybe not so much focusing on the like agriculture sector anymore. I think I give the opportunity first for Rizky to answer the first, second, and third question.
Okay, so thank you for the questions. For the first question on gig economy, yeah, very, very important, and I think it's a very relevant point, especially for what I've put out, like the change in the past 5 to 10 years. So the way I see is that, so there are several papers just came out, and actually one just came out like maybe this week on mismatch. So we do see some mismatch in the labor market. So for example, there are sectors that cannot employ as high as it should be, for example. So those people that have higher skill have to resort to a lower skill jobs, yeah. So this mismatch happened, and I think the way we see on the other side of the coin is this all gigs economy flourishing. So the way I see it, instead of like we need to change the education to match this gig economy, the gig economy itself is an outcome of lack of good jobs creation. So the way, since many of this gig economy have lower fixed costs, oh, I'm sorry, I think the echo really hurts Bill. So I'm going to try to speak really loud. I don't know whether you can hear me. No? Is this one better? This one maybe less echo, yeah? Okay. So the gig economy jobs is the easiest outside options. It has lower fixed costs, not only in terms of you do not need to have high fixed assets, and also you do not have to have certain skills. Instead of, for example, if you want to be like a designer or like a logo maker and so on. So the increase of this gig economy, I think, is actually not a good sign of growth and not a good sign of job creations. I have another paper on, when the government increased the minimum fare for ojol, so the online drivers. Even within a very small increase, people increase their time more in the platform. And that actually not increase their wage, because everyone now has like less customer per day and less transaction per day. So the increase in the fare that was led by the government was not actually effective. So, but that shows like how much time and how eager everyone to have like another extra income. So I think this gig economy question is, I mean, it's good that we have it, because otherwise there's no other outside options. So it has become kind of like a social security or the security job that everyone can access to. The second question was about household gap, yeah. Oh, debt, yeah, sorry. So I think the more recent problem, instead of the apa namanya, lintah darat, is actually the pinjol and the the judo, right? So there are studies showing that the increase in judo is really exponential, and the problem here, instead of only about people are actually consciously want to do judo, like judi online, the gambling online, but they are kind of fooled, or like the access to, there is like low literacy on which one is actually a game, which one is actually not a game and instead a judo. So on top of it is this pinjol, which is also actually lintah darat, but just in a different form. Some are maybe benign and actually capture, those that are not bankable, but many are. This is a problem that I think needs to be taken care structurally, including from the financial authority side. in terms of governing and protecting people's safety, and instead of making this debt as a good intertemporal problems solution, but it has been many anecdotal evidence show that this is actually really detrimental for their long-term income and expenditure. So I think that's from me. Apa ya? Oh, the child marriage, the choosing not to have a child. So I do not have any expertise on this, but I think we were talking about the numbers that you put up, like how depressing, I think, to be a Gen Z. Yeah? So I can understand. I mean, like if people do not want to put, to have child, and given that, and on another, we were working on another paper. When we work about this, we will try to also find studies on return to education. This is not yet confirmed, but what we see so far is also the return to education is smaller now. So I can understand the pressure that Gen Z feels. I think despite they're very young, you guys are very young, but you still want to be responsible. So I think, and there are papers showing that the fertility rate has gone down globally. So I think it's another problem of aging population with an even lower people who are in the productive bracket that can pay for the pension. I think that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Right. I'll just try to get a balance of not speaking too loud, because my voice doesn't project very well. So it's a bit less echoey. Edo, yeah, thank you for that question. It's definitely something, that is a pressing issue. Certainly in Malaysia, it must be higher now, I think, but some time ago, I know a few years, it was calculated about 80%. So, and just household debt of GDP. And I think it could partially also account for, right, if it's expenditures that are debt funded, it would show up, in the surveys, right? As people report, this is how much I spend. I don't think the sources of the debt sources probably are not captured very well. So again, yeah, if your expenditures and income, especially expenditure, is boosted, but underlying that, is I think a very serious problem. I'm not going to talk about particular solutions, but I think just to break it down, that there could be different motivations or pressures. I mean, most severely, I think if it's for consumption, right? So it's then it's kind of a more pressing one that would need to be addressed, looking at income, earnings, and wages. I think perhaps a bit more in the middle level, where it is about durable goods, if it's for vehicle purchase and housing. I mean, it would still be a burden, but there could be an asset attached to that. But still a question as well of the cost of those, especially of housing and vehicles. So it definitely is policy, something of policy importance. I think it's also a bit complex and has to be broken down in terms of the analysis and the solutions. Neither of us are demographers or in much capacity to say anything in depth. I mean, I know people who have made that decision, choosing not to have children, and that also could be for various reasons. Some of it is more long-term, climate change and sort of a very bleak outlook, and some is a bit more practical about the cost. So, I mean, I think it's a bit of a, you're torn between, yes, personal choice, but if you, from the policy standpoint nationally, no, if a lot of people are doing this, then it's not good for the country, that you are not going to have population growth, for the future. So, I mean, I guess the one that can be done a little bit more is the practical, and I think if it's a question of future cost, then public education, right, or accessible education is, I think, one that really weighs heavily at that decision-making about children. I mean, I think health is about that cost escalate, later in life. I mean, yeah, we have to also just be finding this, making more progress on the bigger issues, especially about climate. I think the climate, the depression about that, right, is, something that is part of especially younger, like Gen Z when they think about these questions of having children.
Okay, thank you. So before Professor William answering, actually we received 3 more questions, so I try to elaborate the questions so you can answer at once. In addition to my question, there is a question from Edo. It's like from Seoul National University. He asked about, have you looked about Vietnam? Probably you can evaluate the land use right market in the context of Vietnam. And then there is also a question from Julfan Tajuddin from Western Sydney University. Is the commodification with distribution is ideal direction? What is the good example? And last one is a question from Izul from FOS IIIU. He asked about what do you think about Indonesian land reform during Jokowi administration? I think that's all questions. The second one is the commodification with distribution is ideal direction. The commodification is ideal direction. Where is there any good example? Thank you, Professor William. We received so many questions, but unfortunate, we don't have any time anymore. So I encourage the participants who have questions to reach out to the panelists. So without trying to make any conclusion, because this is a very extraordinary presentation, but I would say that inequality is like something that could not just show by the macro data, because it has layered, it has a different aspect that could be determined. So I guess, please give applause again to our three speakers. Thank you so much. Back to the MC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arima. Another round of applause to our panelists for the final plenary session. Before we ask them to return to their seats, we'd like to invite the Vice Rector of Academic and Student Affairs to present some souvenirs as a token of appreciation to the speakers. Okay, to the panelists, if you will, you may stand. We will start from the left-hand side to Dr. Rima, please. Shafiq, yes. Yeah. Okay, starting from the speakers to Rizky. Next, to Dr. Lee Hock Aun. And finally, to Dr. William Hurst. As well as the moderator, Dr. Rima. We'll have a short photo session. Three, one. Thank you to all the panelists. You may return to your seats. Honorable guests, to our last agenda of the conference, we invite the Vice Rector for Academics and Student Affairs of Universitas Islam International Indonesia to deliver the closing remarks. To Dr. Shafiq Hashim, the time is yours.
Thank you, Fahrul. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished scholars, speakers, dear colleagues, and participants, ladies and gentlemen. As we come to the end of the 2026 IFAR Consortium Conference, I would like to begin by expressing, on behalf of Universitas Islam International Indonesia, our deepest gratitude to all of you who have made these past days intellectually rich, challenging, and memorable. We have listened to keynote addresses, plenary presentation, individual papers, discussion, and questions from scholars coming from different countries, disciplines, and intellectual tradition. And perhaps the greatest value of a conference such as this is not that we live with one definitive answer. Rather, we live with better question. Our theme, contours of inequality, power, protest, privilege in Southeast Asia, has reminded us that inequality is not simply a matter of numbers, of income, wealth, education, or access to the resources. Inequality is also about power, who has the ability to shape institution, who has the ability to assess the opportunities, who has protected when economies change and who bears the risk, whose voices are heard and whose remain invisible. These questions have emerged repeatedly throughout our discussion yesterday, today, and yesterday before. Our opening keynote by Professor Vivek Sieber offer one particularly powerful way of thinking about these issues through the question of industrial policy. His argument reminded us that economic growth and development cannot be understood simply in terms of market, policies, or institutions in isolation. Ultimately, they involve relationship among the state, capital, labor, and society. And perhaps of the most important lesson from our discussion is that growth is not the same thing as distribution. An economy can grow while inequality persists. A country can industrialize while some communities remain excluded. New technologies can create enormous wealth while also producing new form of insecurity and also inequality. This is particularly important as South Asian enter a period of profound transformation. We are confronting climate change, artificial intelligence, automatization, demographic change, new pattern of migrations, financial globalization, and rapidly changing form of work. This transformation create opportunity, but they also raise difficult questions about who benefit and who bears the cost. Our discussion have shown that there are no easy answer, but they have also shown the importance of bringing different perspectives into conversation. Economists need sociologists, political scientists need historians, policymakers need to listen to communities, and don't forget the people of religion, ulama also need a people like Karl Marx, Feuerbach, Sigmund Freud, and others. And the university need to create space where this conversation can take place openly and critically. This is particularly meaningful for IIIU. As International University Indonesia, IIIU seeks to become a meeting point between Indonesia and the wider world and between different intellectual traditions. Our Faculty of Social Science, our Faculty of Economics and Business, and our program in public policy, including Master of Public Policy in Climate Change and MPP in Sustainable Finance, reflect our commitments to understanding environmental issues, economic, social transformation, not as separate questions, but as interconnected challenges. We hope that this conference will therefore not be an endpoint. We hope it will become the beginning of new research collaboration, new conversation, new publication, and perhaps most importantly, new ways of thinking about how societies can become more just and inclusive. I would like to express our sincere appreciation to IFAR Consortium, especially Professor Jeffrey Winters and his colleague from Northwestern University, Professor Dr. Jamhari, our beloved rector, and also the director of IIIU IFA, Dr. Sirojuddin Arif, the convener of this conference, and all members of the 2026 IFAR Organizing Committee. Thank you, and of course, I also would like to thank our keynote and plenary speakers, presenters, discussion moderators, and everyone behind the scene who has worked to make this conference possible. And to all of and to all of our international guests, particularly those who have traveled a long distance to join us. Thank you for bringing your ideas, your question, and your intellectual generosity to IIIU. A good academic conference doesn't end when the final session ends. It continues in the conversation we take home, in the question we continue to debate, and in the research that follows. So as we close this conference, let us carry forward not only what we have learned about inequality, but also share commitment to understand its deeper causes and to imagine institutions and policies capable of addressing them. May our discussion here contribute in however modest way to Southeast Asia, in which economic transformation is accompanied by greater dignity, opportunity, and justice for all. Oh yeah, once again, I forgot to mention here that we would like to extend the aspiration of our college here at IIIU, our participants, our guests in the conference, and the academic community of IIIU. Due to the success of this conference, we propose to ISR SF, especially Professor Jeffrey Winters and the colleagues from Northwestern University, that the conference is hoped and expected to be organized annually at IIIU. This is the aspiration from us today, and thank you very much. With that, I'm pleased to declare the 2026 IFAR Consortium Conference officially closed. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shafiq Hashim, for the kind departing words. Distinguished guests, as we come to the end of the IFAR 2026 Consortium Conference, on behalf of the organizing committee, we'd like to thank each and every one of you once more. We sincerely apologize for any miscommunication or technical difficulties that you might have experienced. With that, from the words of the Vice Rector, it is my honor to formally bring the 2026 IFAR Consortium Conference to a close. Thank you all. Safe travels to those of you heading home, and I hope to see you again in our next occasion. Good afternoon and goodbye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a sudden request. We'd like to invite everyone to come up on stage for a group photo. I hope we can, immortalize this moment since it's the final day and many of the international speakers will be returning far from the Asia continent. So please, if you will, come join us in the front and we'll have our media team to take documentation.